My name is Thomas Opel. I'm the Executive Vice President of the American Sustainable Business Council. And on behalf of ASBC and our panelists, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar on the business case for One Planet Prosperity. For those of you who aren't familiar, the American Sustainable Business Council is a powerful coalition of business organizations and companies that are committed to advance market solutions and advocate for policies at the state and national level to support a vibrant, just, and sustainable economy. ASBC and its organizational members represent more than 250,000 businesses across the United States. ASBC is focused on 4 broad policy areas, some of which we'll touch on today: climate and energy, infrastructure, a high road economy, meaning a more just and equitable system in which all stakeholders are considered, or not just considered, but actively involved for long-term shared prosperity, not just short-term profits, and a circular economy based on the principles reduce, reuse, recycle, while seeking to eliminate toxic materials and processes. And among the activities, we have a very active climate working group. Our last climate working group conference call, we had close to 50 participants. And we're actively working on issues like carbon pricing, the youth climate strike, Green New Deal, regenerative agriculture, renewable energy, and we are still in campaign following this administration's incredibly short-sighted decision to remove the US from the Paris Accords. And I think I came across this image not long ago, and I think there is nothing more telling in terms of the business case for why we need to deal with climate crisis. There are no jobs on a dead planet. Truer words could not be spoken. So today's webinar poses the question is whether your company is set up to support humanity's long-term success on our finite planet. In 2019, Schneider Electric, represented by Kevin Self, and Global Footprint Network, represented by Matisse Wackernagel, teamed up to invite business leaders to assess how One Planet compatible strategies can deliver differentiation and value in the market. One Planet compatible companies are those companies whose goods and services contribute to humanity's ability to live within the means of planet Earth, which includes combating climate change. And these are the companies that contribute to One Planet prosperity, and I'll let our speakers talk about that further. Let me introduce first Matisse Wackernagel, who's the co-creator of the Ecological Footprint accounting methodology. He's worked with governments, corporations, and NGOs on 6 continents and has lectured at more than 100 universities. He's authored and contributed to more than 100 peer-reviewed papers, as well as articles, reports, and various books on sustainability that focus on embracing resource limits and developing metrics for sustainability, including, in 2019, our Ecological Footprint, Managing Our Biocapacity Budget, and the World Wildlife Federation International's Biennial Living Planet Reports. He's earned multiple awards, including the 2018 World Sustainability Award, the 2012 Blue Planet Prize, the 2007 Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship, and the 2005 Herman Daly Award for the U.S. Society for Ecological Economics. And I now feel completely overwhelmed by Matisse's background. Our second speaker, Kevin Self, is the Senior Vice President for Strategy, Business Development, and Government Affairs at Schneider Electric. As a member of Schneider's North America leadership team, Kevin is responsible for leading development of the North American strategy that aligns with Schneider Electric's energy management and automation growth aspirations. Kevin's responsibilities include leading North America's overall strategy development process, identifying new opportunities for growth, and developing and driving policy and influencing outcomes at the state and federal levels. Kevin serves on the boards of the Alliance to Serve Energy, the Advanced Energy Economy, University of Michigan's Energy Institute, and the Urb Institute and Northwestern University's Institute for Sustainability and Energy. Kevin previously held strategy and corporate development roles with Johnson Controls Building Efficiency Business, Miller Brewing Company, GE Healthcare, and McKinsey & Company. And he holds an MBA from Northwestern and Master and Bachelor of Science degrees in engineering from the University of Michigan. And then after Matisse and Kevin finish presenting, we'll take time for your questions. We would ask, if you look at the bottom of your screen, rather than using the chat box, we'd ask you to use the Q&A function, which is a little bit to the right of the chat. That'll make it easier to keep track of these questions. With that, I will turn it over to Matisse.
Thank you so much, Thomas. And there's already a great question in the Q&A, so keep them coming. First of all, thank you so much, Thomas Oppel and David Levine from the American Sustainable Business Council for organizing this great event and having us here. And then also, obviously, Schneider Electric, Kevin Self, to be on this call. And just for disclosure first, Global Footprint Network, where I'm part of, we have been working for a number of years now with Schneider Electric, and very much of the thinking that I'll be presenting also evolved during that collaboration. So the question being like, how can we live given there's one planet? One planet is our context. It's not a goal, it's our context in which we have to operate, and we're not operating so well in all domains, as we have seen with climate change, and now probably the pandemic is in everybody's mind as well. Now, I think what the pandemic shows us very powerfully is that we are one biology. The virus in itself is not discriminatory. No, we recognize that we are all connected in one biosphere. And that's how the biosphere looks. I'm trying actually to get the next screen on, but I'm not sure I'm able to do that very well here. Let me see if I can move. Oops. Let me see. Okay, I'm gonna go back to my slide here. There's a bit of a time delay, so I have to learn as I speak to you. So now it should come on, and then we're gonna go down with one. Somehow it's not getting to the next screen. Okay, now it's working. So what I want to say is we are all one biology. And a picture that a video that represents it very well shows kind of the biological productivity of this planet over the year. It's a little bit choppy on this video, but it looks like a heartbeat. And you can see in the winter, much of the productivity, the northern hemisphere winter, much of the productivity is on the southern hemisphere summer, because that happens at the same time, and vice versa. So it's like a beating heart. And that's the biocapacity, regeneration that powers us, that provides us all food, provides us carbon sequestration, all the services we want. It's what we believe the limiting material factor for the human economy, how much the earth can renew. And that's our budget we can live from. And even fossil fuel is limited by how much biocapacity we have, because ultimately, there is also limited oil on the ground, but even more limited is the amount of regeneration that is able to absorb the excess CO2 from fossil fuel burning. So essentially, we are in competition for this regeneration of this planet. And that's what we call our ecological footprint. Is the slide moving or not? Yeah, it's coming slowly. So that's what we call our ecological footprint. It's basically, if you think about your own life, if you add up all your demands for orange juice, fiber, for our clothes, for milk, or for wheat, or everything you use, you add up. You can say how much ecologically productive space is required to produce what I have. And if you do the calculation at the global level, what we come to calculate for using UN data is that overall human demand is now 75% larger than what Earth can renew. It's like using 1.75 Earth. And then you could say, how many planets should we use? We have one Earth. And then we should remember that we're not the only species on this planet. There are many other ones as well. And E.O. Wilson, an eminent biologist from Harvard, who's now retired, he believes that in order to maintain 85% of the biodiversity on this planet, of the wild species, we would need about half of the planet left aside for other species, which also would be good for climate change. So if we look then at, we use 1.75 planets now, we only may want to use half a planet. The distance between those is about 3.5-fold. That's the factor between how much we use and how much we have. And okay, now I'm showing. So how do we overcome this factor? We believe what's really necessary to do is to translate into something that becomes relevant to people. And that's why we translate this 1.75 Earth into a date. We say, by when in the year from January 1st to that date have we used as much as Earth can renew? And last year that fell on July 29th. Now, the point is not only to say by when have we used as much as Earth can renew in the entire year, but how can we move that date? And that's where we came in conversation with Schneider Electric as well to say, if we applied the technology from Schneider Electric, for instance, around the world, just with Schneider technology applied, how much could we move the date? And we concluded it's about 21 days, just by making electricity system more efficient, the use of electricity more efficient, making the smart grid better, etc. That alone, we could move the date by 21 days. If we move the day 5 days every year, we would get to less than one planet before 2050. That's kind of the context, just to explain it. Now, what does that mean for businesses? That's just kind of the overview. One is that it becomes increasingly recognized by many, like the Pope, for example, felt that Earth Overshoot Day was really a call to action. So that's what he said just after Earth Overshoot Day last year. Or also, you may remember the young lady, Greta Thunberg from Sweden, refusing a prize, an environmental prize from the Nordic country because she said if everybody lived like people in the Nordic countries, it would take for Earth. So that's clearly not sustainable. So that's what they need to work on. Now, what it means for businesses can be very specific, because ultimately what we recognize, we can measure these conditions very specifically. You see this diagram here that has two axes. The horizontal axis says for sustainable development, there's a development side. We want to have great lives. The higher you are to your right, the higher you are in human development. It's measured by the United Nations through the Human Development Index. 1 would be heaven, and 0 would be hell. You know, that's kind of the spectrum. 0.8 or 0.7 is high development, 0.8 is very high development. But then we also need to find out how many resources does it take for this development. And we can measure that in number of planet Earth. So we have one planet, but as I also said, probably we should go for half a planet. That gives us in the vertical, in the horizontal, gives us a line of how few resources we should use. So there we can then see the goal. The blue box, it should be probably even tighter, defines where we have high human development within the means of one planet. You know, if everybody lived like you, how many planets would it take? So that's kind of the goal that we need to look for. So I put a little planet there for the goal, and then I also put the planet where the planet is right now, like how much the average human development, average use of ecological resources, and the dots show all countries of the world where they're at. And so the question becomes very simple for companies. There are two key strategies, a vertical strategy and a horizontal strategy. The vertical strategy is to say, how can we produce the well-being we have using far fewer resources? And that's at the core of what Schneider does. How can we provide at least the same level of comfort, if not more, using fewer resources as we use our machines better and more efficiently? The horizontal strategy is kind of the other question to say, we know that people have human needs that we want to fulfill. How can we provide for these human needs within the planetary budget that is available? So these are the two strategies, and probably a combination of both, that truly make you relevant. What are the domains in which we can operate? And we got the idea from the then Minister of Environment of France, Nicolas Hulot, who said, not only we need to have a symbol of saying, let's move the date, but by doing that, we can start to help people see where are the big opportunities for transformation and the business opportunities to actually move in this direction. So there's one, the thumb tells us on the supply side, can we make the planet stronger? Can we increase biocapacity? That's one area. And then there are 4 areas of demand. 1, 2, 3, 4. The first one is, how can we make cities more efficient, like more dense, more and so it takes less transportation, more efficiently organized, it takes less transportation, and more efficient build houses that are using less energy. That's how do we build our cities. The second one is how do we power them. So obviously if we use solar power rather than coal power, that reduces our demand, our ecological footprint quite significantly. How do we feed ourselves? Right now, about 45% of the biocapacity of the planet is used to feed ourselves. And then one that is often forgotten, but quite significant as well. How many are we on the planet? If you double as many, obviously there's only half as much planet there's only half as much planet per person available. So all our key factors all provide significant business opportunities. And how do they manifest? I think what it comes down to, and that's how we formulated it with Schneider Electric as well, the recognition that if you as a business provide goods and services that humanity's success depends on, you are baking long-term success into your own strategy because the market will open up. If you provide something that is not needed, the market will shrivel away. And I think perhaps the most significant insight for us, that's what we also had with Schneider, this is not a CSR strategy. It sounds like CSR, it sounds like a moral obligation. It's not. It's a key determinant whether you are able to gain a bigger market in the future. And that's what we have been discussing with Schneider Electric. And that's why I'm particularly pleased also here to have Kevin Self, who is leading strategy for North America of the Schneider Electric Group, and has been a thinker that has been integrating this thinking very eloquently. And so he is here to also tell us how they have thought about how to make this happen on the ground with their significant business that has about 140,000 employees around the world. And it's a great pleasure to have you, Kevin, with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here and to tell the Schneider Electric story. If you could move to the next page, thanks, that's great. So it's a great pleasure to be with you today. At Schneider Electric, we are very proud to lead the digital transformation of energy management and automation. We power and digitize the economy, and we base this on our firm belief that power and digital together create the foundation of life, education, progress, and performance. Next page. So who are we? So we believe that access to energy and digital is a basic human right. And there's about 1.2 billion people on the planet today that do not have access to electricity, or it's electricity that is very transient. We empower everyone on Earth to make the most of their energy and resources, ensuring what we call Schneider is on, or life is on. Because we work in around 150 countries, we know that life is on when energy is on and when we have the right access to energy. And in the 21st century, this also means having access to digital. And this creates a passport for a decent life, which is access to education, economic inclusion, and progress for all. Next page. So we're very proud to be a growing technology company, providing energy and automation, digital solutions for efficiency and sustainability. Our company is about 186 years old, started in France in the 1830s. To Matthias's point, we have over 135,000 employees in over 100 countries. Our executive leadership team is strategically placed in hubs closer to our customers and employees. For example, our CEO, Jean-Pascal Tricois, for the last 9 years has worked out of Hong Kong, yet we are French-based. We're serving our customers in 4 growing end markets: buildings, data centers, industry, and infrastructure. And as you can see, our revenues are well balanced across Asia Pacific, North America, Western Europe, and the rest of the world. Next page. And so with all these capabilities, we are very aware of our responsibility in a changing world. And so today, even after the Paris Agreement and the multitude of pledges from companies, we are still on a trajectory of 3.5 degrees Celsius increase in the global temperature. And we start to see the effects everywhere in the world: drought, water shortage, migration, hurricanes, typhoons, etc. And if you look at climate change, it's all about emissions. And if you look at carbon emissions, it's only an issue of energy and efficiency. And so 80% approximately of emissions are due to energy consumption. And the energy consumption is multiplied by 10 in the last century. And if we don't do anything, it's going to be 4x more in this century. And this in a world where 60% of the way we manage energy is already inefficient. However, sustainability is becoming a focus to most companies today, and our best chance to success is to identify together these opportunities. It was interesting, and it was mentioned, the U.S. walking out of the Paris Agreement. The day after the U.S. walked out of the Paris Agreement in 2017, our CEO was actually in St. Petersburg, and CNBC grabbed John Pascal for an interview and said, well, now based on this commitment, are you going to be walking away from your commitments? And John Pascal was very straightforward and says, you know, the private sector, the cities, the states, our customers are demanding this of us. And so it makes good business economic sense to continue down this path. And even in the midst of COVID-19 and the issues that it presents, we are not backing down on our commitments either. Next page. And so let's have a closer look on how to address this challenge, which is defining our generation. So today we're facing two major technology disruptions that make the resolution of our challenge possible: the energy transition and the digital transition, which allow us to think and be more efficient than we used to be. For most of us who work in energy and automation, this means we're in the center of these two disruptions, and we at Schneider Electric are very much centered in the two of these. Next page. So these two disruptions, energy transition and digital, allow us to think about a world that's much more efficient and much more sustainable based on two pillars: energy and process efficiency. At Schneider Electric, we think these two are impossible to decouple. If you want to tackle your efficiency and energy, you need to tackle your process. To slow down your machines at times, to switch off parts of a business at times, they're all linked. At the same time, if you want to run your process efficiently, you need to have energy that's reliable and efficient to sustain. And we're talking about one equation for total efficiency for a sustainable future. Next page. And so if we look at this energy transition disruption, we believe change is possible, but we have 20 years to change the trajectory. Otherwise, the warming continues and accelerates the whole chain. We must tackle the challenge not in the next 70 years, but in the next 20. And our goal is a 50% reduction. And just to be clear, we Schneider Electric made a commitment about 3 years ago to be carbon neutral by 2030. And then at the New York Climate Week last September, John Pascal recommitted us to carbon neutrality by 2025. So it is real to us, and we're doing everything we can to drive forward. So to see a path, save, electrify, and decarbonize is the equation we have in front of us. The first step is using digital to save energy everywhere. 30% to 50% efficiency on everything we retrofit and renew in the world. We just need to retrofit 2% of our buildings or plants every year. So in 20 years, we've completed 40+%. Every time we build a new place or revamp a new place, we should also target 30 to 50% savings. This way we'd curb our energy consumption while still providing energy access to the billion+ people who don't have it today. The second step is to electrify. All projections are showing the consumption of electricity will double in the next 20 years, while the rest of energy will flatten. It's obviously very dependent on where you sit in the world. The US has done a much better job over the past couple of decades with greater efficiency measures and also moving a lot of production offshore. However, given everything going on with COVID-19, there's a strong belief that you're going to start seeing manufacturing come back to the US. And so why this electrification? Because electricity is the only vector of consumption that allows decarbonization. Today we see buildings becoming more electric, fast-growing IT and data centers, all electric, and we're just starting the biggest energy migration in the history of energy, mobility, and electric vehicles. Today, electricity is only 20% of the world energy consumption. In the next 20 years, we believe it'll go to 40%. For those of us in the industry, it means significant opportunities, and we'll invest as much in electricity in the next 20 years as we have since the beginning of electricity in the early 1900s. And then the third step is to decarbonize, to make sure this electricity is coming from carbon neutral sources, renewables, and storage. And this will go from 6 to 40% of the energy generation in the next 20 years. Next page, please. And so we strongly believe that great people make Schneider a great company, a community of people inspired by a meaningful purpose, diversity and inclusion, and empowered values. We create the right environment for our employees to succeed, and we take this to heart. So the leadership team at Schneider Electric, the top leaders, we all have part of our long-term pay based on hitting our CSR targets. Our planet, people, profit targets are all part of how we get paid, and it's how we live at Schneider every day. Next page, which is my last. And so we're getting some great external recognition these days from the progress we are making. I heard the comment up front about the various organizations that you're engaged with. We actually were one of the founding partners of the Climate Leadership Council, about 2 or 3 years ago with Ted Halstead. So we're very happy and proud to be one of the original members as we all work multiple ways to make this planet a better place. You can see some of the various awards that we have been granted from the Global 100, the Fortune Most Admired, the top CEOs, and so on. So I think I'll just leave it with that. But once again, in closing, at Schneider Electric, we believe that everyone on this planet has a right to sustainable and resilient energy, and the way it's delivered today is not that. And so we look very forward to assisting the planet to move forward. Thank you.
Okay, Kevin and Matisse, thank you both very much. I will say, Kevin, I had the honor for 8 years during the previous administration to serve as Chief of Staff to the Secretary of the Navy, and got an opportunity to work with Schneider and some of your folks because my boss had a commitment he made in 2009 to get the Navy and Marine Corps moving away from fossil fuels. And he set a goal in 2009 that the Navy and Marine Corps would be relying on at least half of its energy by 2020 from renewables, mainly electric, mainly from wind and solar. We got to that goal in 2015 ashore, using, working in partnership with a lot of great companies, including Schneider, was really help. I remember one of the first trips I made with the Secretary out to the Pacific Northwest. We went on a Navy base, and this was back in 2010. And the CO of the base, knowing that we were coming and knowing of the Secretary's interest, said he decided to look at his electric bill. And at the time, his electric bill, basically all he could find out was 90% of his bill was described as line loss. So he had no clue, so your point about efficiency being tied to understanding your processes and understanding the data is critical. Let me start. We've got already lined up some great questions. Let me start, Kevin, and I think I know the answer to this, but particularly now with COVID, how are your clients responding to your message and responding to Schneider's positions?
Yeah, so obviously all of us are dealing with a very different world right now than we were eight weeks ago. And so a couple of things. One, our clients are not backing off of commitments they've made. I guess the better answer as well is no one made a commitment to be carbon neutral by the end of 2020. We all realize this is a process that we're all having to move through. So it might slow us down a bit in 2020, but it's not going to affect our commitments of 2025 and 2030. And that's what we see by a lot of customers. I'm sure all of you have seen the various statistics. I saw at a Bloomberg that based on the slowdown, greenhouse gas emissions, I think will drop 8% this year in the US. And then Washington Governor Inslee is also trying to use this as an opportunity because all these buildings are not being used at the moment as a way to rethink work and how we utilize these structures is we try to drive deeper decarbonization. So in some ways, this is presenting a great opportunity for many companies to rethink how they do business going forward.
And I'm going to throw this open to both of you, but Matisse, perhaps you can start. We have a question. Basically, how significant are the recent statements from BlackRock and the Business Roundtable talking about shifting investment to companies with lower climate related risks and widening the purpose of business to benefit not just shareholders, but the wider circle of stakeholders? Matisse, you want to take a shot at
Yeah,
that?
no, obviously it's very significant. Decisions shape our future, and the biggest decisions that shape our future are investment decisions because they have a very long time lag. Most people think investments are just paper, but actually behind the paper is real physical life. And the question is to what extent what we are investing in really has a future. And we know much more about the future than most people probably may want to know. We know that people will want to sleep and eat, and have secure housing. And we also know that we will have to be out of fossil fuel use pretty soon. So those infrastructures that can operate well using far fewer resources will just be the ones that gain in values, and the ones that are not able to, they will lose in value. Not only will they lose in value, they will lose in value when the economy is also strained. So the economic case today is already pretty clear. It's just that we haven't acted upon it because we think sustainability is just a noble cause and just something nice to do, not a necessary thing. So I think from an economic perspective, we are misguided because the economics is already real. That's what Schneider shows as well. But then to see that significant investors like BlackRock are starting to smell the future is a good sign that the market may shift much more significantly than we have seen before.
Yeah, let me add a point as well. So I would say one of the most outspoken capitalists of our time would be Jim Cramer on CNBC. He runs his show Mad Money in the afternoons. And a good friend of mine is Jeff Eckel, who's on the board of the Alliance to Save Energy with me. He's also the founder and CEO of Hannon Armstrong, which is providing financing for a lot of these projects. And if you just Google, Hannon Armstrong, Jim Cramer, late mid-March or so, maybe early March, Jeff was on Mad Money, and Jim Cramer was touting the benefits of this type of financing more than he had ever. It's as though he had just an epiphany had occurred, and he realizes that we cannot continue to treat this planet as it has. And so if you want to look at least one data point of a pure capitalist singing these praises, take a look at that 4 or 5 minute clip.
I think there's no question people are beginning to understand that the old narrative that somehow you have to choose between a healthy environment and a healthy economy is just completely wrong, and that in the 21st century, what's going to power the economy is the entrepreneurial effort, the innovation to solve this climate crisis and to develop new technologies and new processes. To power our economy and preserve our environment and our planet. Next question. One of the discoveries that's coming out of this pandemic, it's just bringing it really home, is the digital divide, the size and depth of that digital divide. And either of you, what are your thoughts about how this very real divide can be addressed globally?
Yeah, so we're dealing with this every day across our business. As I said, we're in 150 countries on the planet. We have a pretty large business called Access to Energy, working in Africa, in India, and other countries that obviously don't have the electricity that we have here in the US. And so we're actively working to develop microgrids so that as those students come to school every day, they're able to, power on a device, get it electrified, take home at night, do their studies under clean flashlight versus some type of a kerosene source. We see this continuing to grow. We're partnering with trade schools in Kenya and in other countries, teaching and educating energy engineers to help us get down this path. It's my belief that John Pascal will not rest easy until the 1.2 billion people on this planet that don't have access gets down to zero. And so we are very actively engaged all across the planet, which is one of the reasons why it's such a great place to work, not just what we're doing here in the US, but what we're doing around the globe.
That's wonderful. I mean, the future is about electrification if you want to have a sustainable future. So clearly our overall metabolism, the resource metabolism, has to be significantly smaller, but electricity will have to be much larger. Seems to be a paradox. And electricity brings two things. I mean, the ability to much more effectively regulate the use of energy, and that's kind of the decarbonization strategy Schneider is pursuing, and also the digitalization, which we have now seen how significant that is as a redundant strategy, as a redundancy strategy, as we are facing COVID-19. Thanks to kind of the better internet possibility, information flows much more easily, and we can remotely control processes. It's much safer. And I think also if you compare with the influenza from 1919 and 1918, where people felt totally isolated, you know, we still say actually it's about, we are physically distancing, but actually we're not socially distancing. We're physically distancing, and socially we can continue to engage and still move forward through difficult times. So I think what we're seeing now is kind of how significant a digital economy is, the potential, the opportunities, and how painful it is to exclude people from it. So it's not just kind of charity for them, like it's kind of basically it's excluding a huge potential. It's like 30 years ago, or still actually more recently, or some places still, where a big part of the human genius is included. For example, women. You know, how can you exclude women? How can you exclude people for certain ethnicities? Or, you know, there's so much ingenuity on the world that we need to solve these big problems. So having people connected so they can participate and work with each other is not an act of charity. It's an act of economic development that can bring us stability and well-being in the long run. And so I think that's why the electrification is such an important factor, and recognizing the synergies between all these aspects, both decarbonization as well as increasing connectivity and opening the level playing field so people can participate in this great transformation that we need to happen. People born after 1985, just by the fact that they're born after 1985, they will be in the workforce at least in 2050. So they will have to oversee a total transformation of the economy. And I mean, we think about the iPhone has been fast in its development. The entire economy has to transform as rapidly. And so we need all the talent we can get from around the world. And I think there's nothing better than the electric path, and to help people be part of it, be online. And that's why it's not charity.
Let me ask, there's another divide, and it was pretty apparent in that one slide, Matisse, where you talked about, you know, the X and Y axes, and that's the divide between, some would say north and south, some would say developed and undeveloped. There are an awful lot of nations out there who may recognize that electricity is the path to the future, but their means of powering that electricity could be fossil fuels, could be coal, could be, you know, that may be, they may see that as the cheapest and quickest way to get them more developed or increase their development. How do we bridge that divide as well? Because it's, you know, it's a lot easier for middle class and upper class folks in North America or Europe to make some of these transitions. It may not be so easy, and Kevin, you're seeing this around the globe as well. But Matisse, why don't you start?
I think, I mean, the divide is more about rural urban. In some ways, they're like the economic advantages are concentrated in urban areas. But I think technologically speaking, there could be a rural revival happening, because what we see technologically now, it's cheaper to produce standalone electricity that is robust and controllable, you know, through solar power, than to bring long lines into the rural areas and have uninterrupted or uncontrollable kind of electricity supply. So electrification of the rural areas is a key ingredient for the transformation to have a steady development emerge, because otherwise the power imbalance between rural and urban areas just kind of will exacerbate, and not go anywhere. So I think we're lucky in some ways that technologically we're getting close to that place where just from a market perspective, the solar standalone technology is starting to be competitive with kind of the, the fossil fuel options. But there is, I mean, it's not a totally one race. We see that now with the kind of the collapse of the oil price overall, that could be a temptation to delay that transformation that is needed. And if we don't do the calculations right, if we have very high discount rates in our net present value assessments, we may opt for short-term solutions that are very detrimental. But if you think again about what kind of infrastructure do you want to be stuck with, because we will be stuck with infrastructure, but you're either stuck in a golden infrastructure or stuck in a trap that will serve you, like that will actually be a burden for you in the future. And I think that's kind of the great hope by investing in the right infrastructure that has a long-term future. Because the climate is not about that long term ago. It's within the next few decades. It's infrastructure put in today will be in place in that future as well. So the economic case is very clear. The technology is here, but I think let's not get tempted by the wrong short-term price signal of oil going down. That would be a disaster.
It was interesting. It was probably a year ago. Our CEO, I think he tweeted out a picture of a microgrid being put in place in Miramar, and they were using the only local transportation they had, which was elephants, who were moving the solar panels. So to Matthias's point, it's much more effective to be putting in place these small, very small focused microgrids with solar local storage than it is running any type of lines. It's resilient, it's sustainable, and ultimately it's more cost effective. Back to the US, we've been one of the pioneers of really launching this energy as a service. About a year ago this month, we launched a joint venture with the Carlyle Group, which is about a $200 billion private equity fund based in Washington, D.C. to focus on, developing clean, sustainable, resilient infrastructure. The first initiative we launched was the redevelopment of JFK Terminal 1, which is about a $10 billion build, retrofit. Once complete, there'll be 10 to 11 microgrids in place. It'll be one of the cleanest airports in the US, if not the world. And we're seeing greater interest in these infrastructure projects where people don't have the CapEx, so they're looking for financing partners who want to own the asset, but they also want to solve for cost, sustainability, and resiliency. And to Matthias's point, based on the cost curves of storage in solar and wind, it's at the point where you can make these very cost effectively.
Well, to your point, Kevin, infrastructure, as I mentioned at the beginning, infrastructure is one of the top 4 things that ASBC is looking at for precisely those reasons. I'm thinking of a conversation I had with some folks in the Virgin Islands shortly after the hurricanes came through, and the conversation there was, we want to rebuild our electric distribution system, and my conversation with them essentially was, why would you rebuild something you just saw get destroyed in an instant, and that is going to get destroyed again with the very next storm, and they're coming more frequently and more intense? So, rather than rebuilding what is essentially a 19th century platform of poles and wires, why not think about a 21st century distribution system, as you say, whether it's microgrids or battery storage technology, some of these other technologies that, again, are going to power our economy, which takes me to a question about, someone's asking about the risk that COVID-19 will derail sustainability initiatives as business retrenched to core operations. And I would say politically as well, as some folks suggest that, well, it's nice to talk about climate change and, but that's a longer term issue and we need to deal with the immediate pandemic crisis right now. What do each of you have to say about that?
I mean, obviously it could go either way. I'm not a prophet in that way, but what I also recognize is I'm from Switzerland originally. I think for many people in Switzerland, even experts, they saw the sustainability and climate dimension as something like noble to do, it's important, but not super relevant for Switzerland. And we do our part, it's a nice thing to do, but poor Egyptians, to say it in a kind of a simple way, poor Egyptians. And now I think people in Switzerland have been woken up. Wow, we are much more fragile. We're much more fragile. It could hit us. We are in the game. We have skin in the game, and so I think recognizing the significance of resource security and being in control of your resources and being able to operate your system, and that with money in a time of crisis, not even the Swiss are able to buy face masks. So I think there's also fomenting the sense of, wow, we need to prepare. We need to have the infrastructure ready for the time that is predictable. So yes, there will be the temptation of kind of getting sidetracked. But I think also there's a more emotional connection to the recognition that we are in that game and it's happening quite fast.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I guess if there can be a silver lining in this pandemic, one of the things I'm hoping is that we all recognize that it really is, this is sort of coming home to roost, the fact that we live on this one planet and that there really must be global solutions.
Yeah.
And that we can't hide, from that, but also the recognition that each one of us must play a role. Each one of us has a responsibility, whether it's social distancing.
I would go even a step further, actually, because I think there's this miscommunication as well around climate change. And we say, oh, we have to solve the global problem, but the globe is so big, what can I do? Let's wait for the UN to agree and then I will act type. I mean, I'm exaggerating for effect. But what the pandemic,
Maybe not.
what the pandemic taught us is by protecting ourselves, that's actually a social service to protect the others. And the same is true for climate. If you make your city and your company and your country ready for the future that we can predict, by making it much more resource efficient, by weaning it off its fossil fuel dependence, then you're also good for the planet, but you're harvesting many of the benefits. So I think there's a very clear connection between self-interest, your skin in the game, the significance to invest in your own ability to operate, and the collective effect, which also makes us stronger and more stable. So I think the pandemic has been helpful to recognize that it's about, by helping ourselves, we are also helping others.
Yeah, I mean, in the conversations I've had with partners and customers and others, I haven't heard a single person say, well, gosh, now that we have this other issue that we're dealing with, thank goodness we don't need to focus on the climate anymore. We can put that in the back room. If anything, I think to Matthias's point is, it's just raise the awareness that there is going to continue to be these global issues that, we can't keep kicking down the road. We need to solve and resolve them. And even, more of the younger generation, I don't see any of them backing off and saying, well, because of this pandemic, we're okay letting things slide. I mean, if anything, I think it's going to reinforce the push to get this fixed.
Even I think as we talk about the younger people, there's this generational gap, so that perhaps the older people are not that enthusiastic about doing something around climate. Oh yeah, it's going to be so much further. I will not be alive anymore, whatever, and the young people say, no, it's about my life, and now COVID is nearly the opposite. It's the young people stepping back to support the older folks, so to say, okay, we are compassionate. We want our older people to survive. And so that's why we all take a beating for the common good, particularly of the older part of the generation. So I think there may be a new social contract that now we look after the older ones, afterwards the olders look after the younger ones. So to recognize we want to have a future together.
We're all on the same planet, right? So we have someone who's watching who says they're a wastewater operator for a major utility in a U.S. state. It's a large company that uses a lot of energy, and at the plants there's a lot of natural gas used for a multiple level hearth furnace. As an employee, is there any way to help the company to be more sustainable in energy use other than staying informed of new policies?
Well, obviously not having the details would be tough to determine, but it's my ingoing hypothesis that anything older than 5 years old has some type of an efficiency opportunity that could save energy. And so, there's obviously the low-hanging fruit of opportunities, and then there's deeper retrofits that can be driven. And as I said, when we launched Alpha Structure a year ago, we assumed there'd be a little bit of interest, because obviously, as you all know, there's been no federal policy any passing of a bill on infrastructure. So the private sector is standing up, and the interest that has been generated is absolutely huge, where there's a party willing to come in and purchase these assets, and then you just end up paying for, you know, the energy as you use it over time. And a lot of times companies are hesitant because they confuse governance with control, and they think, well, or ownership. They think they need to own the asset, because if they don't own it, they lose all governance, and that's absolutely not true. And once you get into conversations, you can walk them through. You can still have 110% of the governance, and you can do that without having to own the capital. So water, wastewater, airports, a lot of opportunities to bring this infrastructure to 2021.
The other thing, Kevin, that I found at Navy as we began to sort of drive the price down was there was this notion, even among people who wanted to do the right thing, that they felt like, well, I'm going to have to pay a premium to do this. And one of the things that we found was, you know, we actually got prices that were not only competitive, but in many cases cheaper, precisely because of what you're talking about, you know, in terms of efficiency and older technologies that you replace. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, and actually I would point you all to Montgomery County, Maryland. Google Montgomery County, Maryland, Schneider Electric. A couple years ago, they had an issue. So it's right outside Washington, D.C., about 1 million people, I think, in the county. Their general services building or facility also had their local police, local fire, small jail. They realized they had electrical switchgear that kept failing from the 1960s. And also they had lost power a couple of times over the previous winters. And so they thought, we need to fix this. And so they contacted us. We actually walked in with our financing partner, the non-regulated arm of Duke Energy. At the end of the day, they got 2 microgrids put in place, and they paid $0 out of pocket. Total cost was probably $5 to $6 million. They entered into 2 25-year concurrent contracts to purchase energy as they used it. It's there on site. It's resilient. So also when the next winter event happens and it shuts down power in Montgomery County, they at least have one site where people can gather to ensure that they have some energy. We're actually doing some further work with them now. So if anyone's interested in hearing the story, not from me, but from a customer, you'll see in the video, his name is Michael Yambrock, and he'd be very happy to talk to you to tell the story about what they're doing.
So when we're talking, when we talk about waste as opposed to energy, we talk about those 3 concepts that I mentioned earlier: reduce, reuse, recycle. There's a question from one of our participants who says it would be important to talk more and more about energy consumption reduction as well, even on a personal level, not only about electrification. And they ask why the media and politicians are not talking about that.
Yeah, let me give a small story, obviously Schneider specific. And so 1.5 years ago, we invested in a company called Sense, S-E-N-S-E. It's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, started by Mike Phillips. And what Sense does is you put it into your electrical panel, and it's electricity focused. And what they do is they listen to your electrical signals. And so they're able to determine, there's your garage door, there's your Keurig coffee maker, there's your water heater. And so it provides you information. And so there's 3 steps of the value it could provide. Most of the people on this call, well, we're a different group, right? Because we're on this call, but most Americans have no idea how much they spend on electricity or where it even comes from. They think it comes out of the wall, right? You turn on the switch and it just happens to be there. Sense actually did a study 2 summers ago in Vermont where they gave units to 100 homeowners, didn't give any information. They just put them in, told them what it was. There's an app where you can follow your electricity use. After some period of time, 30 or 60 days, consumption had decreased by 8%, purely because people had greater awareness. And so there's 3 steps with ultimately what we could do with Sense. One is it's just providing information so you're smarter. Secondly, it could start recommending things to you, saying, hey, it'd be smarter because of time of use rates for you to do your dishes or do your laundry or charge your car from 2 to 3 in the morning. And the third step is you would let it take control. You would give it the optimization scenarios of what you're trying to solve for, and it would then turn things on and off. And so that's the next step that we're getting to drive greater efficiency within single family homes. And it's our intent then to use this technology, expand it to, multi-tenant homes, and ultimately to commercial office buildings.
Information is clearly power. Matisse, we're beginning to come up toward the top of the hour, so I'm going to give you why don't you one more opportunity to jump in here, and then I'll close this out.
Yes, it's a very good conversation. I think for us, the big shift has to happen that we recognize sustainability or climate change as something like brushing our teeth. It's not a noble thing, it's a necessary thing to do. And I think for many, kind of the story that they hear is to say, oh, it's about suffering and sacrifice after suffer and sacrifice. Clearly, we have to get to a world where we use far less. However, the motivation for people is not, oh, I will take the chocolate away from you. No, that's not what motivates. But I think what's the power of the human existence is that we have foresight and we can produce innovation, say, how do we want to do it? How do we want to live differently? And then it doesn't feel like giving up. It feels actually like we have more safety. That's why we don't say, reduce your footprint, because people say, oh my God, what are you taking away? We call it move to date, because move to date is a way to say, together we have to achieve it. Not only that, it's about expanding our resource security. We're not taking away, we're making our lives safer and better, which means being able to live on less resource throughput. So I think we need to be able to show the benefit of saying this is an investment in our ability to live better. And that will also involve using less, but that makes us safer. It's not for suffering.
Matisse, thank you, and thank you to you as well, Kevin, and to thank all of you who joined us. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of your questions. Some great questions I left on the table, but thank you for joining the webinar today. We certainly hope it motivates you to action. If you're already an ASBC member, we thank you for your commitment. And if you're not an ASBC member, we hope you'll consider joining the more than 250,000 responsible businesses who are advocating for sustainable economic and environmental policies. You can learn more by visiting www.asbcouncil.org. And again, Matisse, Kevin, thank you for the great work you're doing. And we look forward at ASBC to continuing to work with you and continuing this conversation. And thank you. And we'll
Thomas.
sign off.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you for hosting, and congratulations to this wonderful organization.
Thank you very much. And this is being recorded, so it'll be on our website too if you had to jump off early or you missed it.
Thank you. Excellent.